I'm Alan Keegan, I'm the voice of Old Trafford, the home of the greatest football club in the world, the home of Manchester United. Well, first and foremost, I was born in Manchester to Irish mum and dad from County Leitrim in the west of Ireland, and the youngest of 5 children. And what makes it interesting is that the other 4 were born in Ireland. So my mum and dad came over for a better standard of living, basically, and new home, new house, a new baby was born, which I think, you know, added to the Keegan household, because I was raised in a household with, you know, Irish accents, never knew anything different. I think it's impacted from day one, to be quite honest with you, because I was, you know, raised in a shop in a sort of highly populated Irish area. So not only was I meeting, you know, sort of the Irish community, but that was part of the integration, you know, and when you're part of that community, as we were, being a focal point with the shop, you know, everybody did the shopping there, you know. My mum used to describe it as the Tesco of its day, you know, because everybody came in, you know, she had a ledger with credit. If people were coming over from Ireland and needed somewhere to stay or needed a job, you know, my mum was like a community centre, because they'd come in, she knew all the local Irish landlords, you know, she'd give them recommendations of who to contact. Obviously, you know, a lot of the contractors at the time came into the shop, so it was a very focal point. And, you know, from my point of view, I was integrated at the very beginning, you know, like just with the people coming into the shop, you know, you had your regular customers who you became familiar with. And it was a rule as well from my parents, but particularly my mum, who ran the shop. You know, my dad was in the construction and building game, as all Irish people were then, you know, coming over to work on the sites, etc., and part of the rebuild of Britain, if you like. But, you know, always be polite to the customers, you know, so I'd walk through the shop and you'd say hello to, you know, Mrs. Murphy or whoever else was there. It was all part of that, you know, community spirit and showing respect to my elders as well. So it's, you know, I integrated into the community. I was integrated into it at a very young age, and, you know, I was very proud of my Irish roots, you know, albeit that later on, you know, there were challenges. Well, I mean, where do you start? You know, I mean, there's influences right across the board, right across, you know, the city, the great city of Manchester, you know, loads of different connections. It was rebuilt by the Irish, definitely after the World War. You know, you look at all the big civil engineering companies that were formed because of that, the rebuild. You can look at it from that point of view, the civil engineering, the sort of regeneration of Manchester, which has happened over many, many years and in different chapters. But then you've got the community spirit with, you know, the sporting side of the Irish community, whether it be the Gaelic, the GAA, you know, the music side, Cultus, Culturieren, you know, right across there. So that sort of integration again that I refer to, that combination of the Irish spirit and, you know, the integration in Manchester as an Irish city, without a shadow of a doubt, the representation has been there for many, many years. You know, the DJing was a big, massive step for me, because back in the day I wanted to DJ. You know, you want to be the next big thing. However, my dad said to me, and this was a man who, you know, had a good education, but he worked in the building game, you know, he'd worked hard all his life to, you know, support his family. And he said to me, if you're going to start this DJing, are you going to do Irish music? You know, is that going to be part of your repertoire? And I started laughing, and I went, no, Dad, no. I said, no one does Irish music, Dad. It's not, you know, it's not cool, Dad. No, I'm going to do pop music. And he leaned forward, and I can see him now, and he said, no one does it. He said, that's the reason why you should do it. So it was a big, big stepping stone for me, that, because that was me becoming part of the Irish community, integrated, and it just exploded. And then the radio came into it when Coming to the Parlour was set up by Eamon O'Neill. He was looking for a team. But there was a sort of stage before that where a group of influential Irish people had sort of campaigned with the BBC to get an Irish voice. So there was a group of people who set up a programme that was actually called Irish Line. That was the first sort of, if you like, voice that the Manchester community could have representing them on the BBC. But then that ended, and Eamon reformed it, and it became Coming to the Parlour, and I became part of that team. Eamon left it, and then I became the main presenter. The BBC were fundamental in giving the Irish a voice through the broadcast of Coming to the Parlour every week. But then another opportunity arose, because there was a presenter on BBC Radio Manchester called Mike Shaft. He was a renowned presenter in the north of England, and he was responsible for getting the first legal radio licence for a community radio station. He went to the Radio Authority and put a package forward, because at the time they were giving out radio licences. So he set up a radio station called Sunset Radio and invited communities to put forward a proposal for radio shows. Well, he obviously knew me, and I had so many big, bright ideas that I wanted to bring forward for the Irish community, you know, to expand what we were doing with Coming to the Parlour. I wanted to take it to another level. So I met Mike and said, listen, you need to give us a longer show. You need to give us at least 2 hours, but maybe 4 hours on a Sunday afternoon. And obviously it was a commercial radio station, so I knew the Irish would support it with the commercials, you see. Well, at that stage, they're thinking money. They want to bring money into the station, so it was part of the sales pack with it. Anyway, to cut a long story short, initially they gave us an hour just to see how we did. And eventually we had 4 hours on a Sunday afternoon, house to crack, and it just exploded. The Irish community loved it. We got anybody who was anything to do with the Irish community, both here and in Ireland, came on that show. Right across the board, from politicians, John Hume, Bertie Ahern, right across to Roy Keane, to the world of sport, to musicians. Everybody was part of that show over a period of time. And then as a result, I was always looking for another avenue to promote the Irish community, to keep the history and the culture. And that's when I decided to do a book, a coffee table book on Irish Manchester, which told the story. If you look at the chapters of the book, it's all about the integration of the Irish in Manchester, that sort of collaboration. And the chapters are all to do with, the construction of Manchester, the integration of the community through the music, through the sport, through all the other levels as well. And the book became a bestseller. And as a result, I collaborated with a friend of mine who's called Danny Claffey, and he was the photographer for the weekly newspaper, the Irish Post. So everything came into it. So I was very much the historical side of the book with the Irish community, and Danny was very much the social side. So if there was an event in Manchester where, say, John Hume was attending, or anybody from the Irish Embassy, then Danny Claffey would be there taking photographs. But anything to do with the history side, that was my part of the collaboration, and the books were wonderful. And we ended up doing 3. It was all good fun, it was all part of that identity, wasn't it, and other events as well for different parts of the political world tied in with the Irish. And then I was also asked, would I do some work at Manchester City? Now, being a Manchester United fan, I had to think about this. Did I want to work at City? But I thought, why not? Let's work for City. Let's see where it leads. I've always been one that, wanted to open up the network. And I took the step and started working for City. And I have to say, it was a great time. City weren't the club that they are now. They're probably at the lowest they've ever been. But at the same time, it was a great learning curve for Alan Keegan, and it was another step in his development, if you like. And as a result of that, I started working for City, started doing some of their events, and cutting a very long story short, ended up being the stadium announcer at Manchester City, which was very interesting. But I have to say, I was always very professional, and I had a great time at City. It was a very enjoyable time working for the club, and that led to me getting the job at Manchester United. So without working at Manchester City and being involved in what they were doing, the road would never have led to the home of the greatest football club in the world, Manchester United. When you look at the Irish connection with Manchester United. I mean, the names roll. I mentioned a few there before, but you're going back to the Busby Babes, you know, you're looking at players that have wore the red shirt of Manchester United, you know, Billy Whelan, Liam Whelan, if you like, you know, you look at Shea Brennan, you know, you look at the 63 winning team with Shea Brennan captain, you look at George Best, the greatest player ever to play for Manchester United, an Irishman, but there is a fellow that's close to him that I'm going to bring into the conversation in a moment. You look at that continuous progress of Irish players, you know, you look, they've always had a conveyor belt, haven't they? You know, they've had Norman Whiteside taking on the mantle. You know, for me, Roy Keane, the greatest ever United player, along with George Best, you know, absolutely number one for me. You know, your Dennis Irwin, Mr. Reliable. Sir Alex Ferguson said he was arguably his greatest ever buy. You know, what a player, what a servant for Manchester United. Still representing the club, still proud to carry that Irishness into the club. You know, that's what it's all about. You know, John O'Shea, the current assistant manager, you know, of the Republic of Ireland. So it continues, you know, and long may it continue, that Irishness, that Manchester Irishness, and the Manchester United Irishness. The beauty of being the announcer at Manchester United is I've got endless memories, you know, both sort of with an Irish connection but a non-Irish connection. So one of them I've got to mention with Roy Keane, because when I launched my book, it was at the time of the Irish Festival, and as I said at the time, I was very involved in the festival. I used to host a lot of the events, particularly the opening of the festival at the town hall, and that particular year the guest of honour was Roy Keane. So I had to take the opportunity, didn't I? And obviously I sort of knew Roy, I'd done stuff with him, wouldn't claim to be a friend of his, but I knew Roy. And when I was at the town hall, I had my book and I got him to stand in with me, and I got a picture with him holding my book, Irish Manchester, in the photograph, and I used it endlessly in my publicity, you know, for the Irish community. So that was great. And I have to say, I did the same with Dennis Irwin for the second book as well. So, you know, I've always used them contacts. But great memories, you know, Ronaldo was always, and probably arguably, you know, the best player I've ever seen, skill-wise, you know. My favourite player, obviously, was Roy Keane, you know, and Brian Robson would be in there. But so welcoming back Ronaldo for the second time, because obviously I was the announcer when he came the first time, and I announced him then when he came on as a sub against Bolton, and I seen this young kid and he was doing flicks and tricks and turning, and I just couldn't believe what I was watching, you know, for this young boy. And then for the second time, you know, coming back, it was absolutely unbelievable. And you know, I've got a recording where I'm welcoming him back to Old Trafford. Old Trafford, please welcome back number 7, Cristiano Ronaldo, and it just erupted. You know, it was unbelievable. I absolutely love it. I'm a Manchester United fan. I'm a season ticket holder. I've never let that season ticket go. I used to sit in the Stretford end, and to be part of the club that you love, it's a dream come true. And every day, every time I go onto that pitch, which I do, to bring the teams out, I always look around at the stadium, and I never tire of that moment, the few seconds before I introduce the team. And of course, welcome to Old Trafford, the theatre of dreams, the home of the greatest football club in the world, the home of Manchester United.